Hey, what's up guys, CodefForge here. Today we'll learn how to implement paging and sorting in Java Spring Boot application using Spring Data. On the screen you can see the project which we will generate. We will use Java 8, it will be a Maven project, and the Spring Boot version will be 2.3.3. We'll use following dependencies. It will be Spring Web for starting our application as the web service. And also we'll use H2 database as our in-memory database engine. And the last thing is Spring Data JPA. Later we will add one more dependency because it can't be added from here. So we'll do it manually, and it will be Spring Fox Boot Starter. And it will add Swagger documentation to our web service, so we will be able to test everything from the web browser. Okay, so I think we can get started. Let's generate the project and jump into the IDE. Okay, so here we are, and the first thing we want to do is to navigate to our project, to the source, main, resources, and we want to open the application properties file. Over here I will paste few properties which we are using across the JPA series. And if you don't know what's going on over here, I encourage you to check out my video about the H2 configuration. So in short, we are enabling H2 Web Console. We are also specifying the database connection, which is the connection to the H2 in-memory database. We are also specifying the user and password for this database. And the last thing is a little bit of configuration for the JPA, like showing the SQL queries. Okay, and now to implement the paging and sorting, we will need some entities to work on. And because of that, we will navigate to the Java, our main package, and over here we'll create a new package which will be called model. Inside we will create a new class, so we right click it, select new Java class, and we will call it student. First thing we want to do is to mark it with the entity annotation, so we want to say entity over here, and we'll also specify the table name, so we want to use the table annotation with the name attribute set to student, like this. Each of our students will have the primary key, and to create primary key we will use the ID annotation together with the generated value annotation, and we will also set the strategy of this generated value annotation to the auto. And of course those annotations will be related to the private long ID field, which will store the primary key. We'll keep it simple, so each student will have private string first name and also private string last name. Nothing fancy over here, so let's also generate the constructors. So first one will be the default constructor, which is required by the Hibernate, and the second one will be for the fields first name and the last name. And we don't have to take care about the ID, which is the auto-generated value. Let's also generate the getters and setters for our fields. So we want to go over here, select getters and setters, and we'll generate it for everything. And we'll remove the set ID because we will not use it at all since it's auto-generated value. Our entity is ready, and now we'll create a repository for it. So we want to click on the main package of our application, select package, and we'll call it repository. And inside we would like to create a new interface. So we want to select interface over here, and we'll call it student repository. First thing we want to do over here is to annotate our interface with the repository annotation, which is not required, but I like to mark it explicitly. And the next thing is that our student repository will extend paging and sorting repository, which is the generic type, so we have to specify for which entity we want to use it. So in our case it will be student, And also we have to specify the primary key type, which is used in the student entity, and in the case of the student it is long. Our repository looks good, and now we'll create our service which will be responsible for the business logic. So we want to right click on our main package, select new package, and we want to say service. Inside we would like to create our new class, so it will be called student service. In the first place, we'll mark it with the service annotation, so Spring will create a bin for this student service class. And also we would like to inject one dependency over here, and we want to inject the student repository. And to do it, we'll say private final student repository type with the same name. And we can of course mark it with the auto-wired annotation, but better practice is to generate the constructor which will initialize this field. And it works exactly the same way as the auto-wired annotation. So Spring will initialize this field. In our student service, we will have two methods. One for retrieving students with the paging, and second one for adding new students. Let's start with retrieving the students. So we want to go over here and we would like to say public. And in case of this paging and sorting repository, we'll be returning the type that is called page. And it is the generic type, so we will pass our entity name over here. So it will be student. And we have to, of course, import it. And now we'll give the name to our method, which will be get students. And this get students method will require some extra information to actually page our results from the database. And to do it, we'll create a new model, which will be called student page. And this student page will wrap up our page information. So we'll have things like private int page number, and by default it will be set to 0. And also it will be private int page size, and by default it will be set to 10. Our student page will also have the information about the sorting, so it will be private sort.direction type, and we'll call it sort direction. And by default our direction will be set to ascending. Last thing is the field which we want to use to sort our page information, and it will be private string sort by field, and by default we'll set it to the last name, which is the student field. We'll also need getters and setters, so let's quickly generate them. So we want it for each field, and it will look like this. Okay, so our student page is ready. Now we can go back to the student service and specify it as the parameter of the getStudent method. So we want to say student page over here, which is the type, and we want to have the same name. We'll receive the student page data from our API consumer, and now we want to use it to create a page request object. So we want to go to the body of our method, and over here we want to create the pageable object. And it is important to pick the import from the Spring framework. So we want to take this one, and it will have the same name. Now we want to use static factory method from the page request class, and the method itself is called auth. Inside we would like to pass arguments to create this object, and we can see that we have to pass the page in the first place. And this page we want to retrieve from our student page object. So we want to say student page get page number. Also the next argument is the size, so we want to say student page dot page size, and we'll move it to the another line, and we'll go over here. We are using the middle overload, so we'll also need the sort object, and we'll go over here and we'll create it. So we want to say sort with the same name. And now we want to use the static factory method from the sort. So we want to say sort.by. And inside we will provide the direction in the first place. So yeah, this is the last overload over here. And it will be student page dot get direction, get sort direction, and the second argument which will pass is the property which we want to use to sort by, and we'll use the student page get sort by. And now we can pass this sort object over here. And now all we have to do is to say return, and it will be the student repository, and we want to call the find all method. And this is this one overload. We can see that we can pass the pageable which we have created. So we want to say pageable over here. And it is all good. And yeah, this is how you want to implement paging and sorting using Spring Data. But of course, we are not done yet. So we'll also add the add students method over here. So we want to go here. We want to say public student, because we want to return the student after adding it to the database, and it will be add student method, and it will accept the student object with the same name. Adding objects to the database is quite easy. All we have to do is to say return student repository dot save, and we want to pass our student which we will receive from the controller. And this is all. Our service is ready. The last thing we have to do is to implement our controller, which will allow us to test everything. So we want to click on our main package, select package, and we want to say controller. Inside we will create a new class, so it will be called student controller. First thing we want to do is to annotate it with the REST controller annotation, and also we will use the request mapping annotation to specify the common path for each of our endpoints, and it will be /students. We also would like to inject the student service, so we will be able to call methods from there, and it will be quite easy because we will say private final student service with the same name, and we'll generate the constructor for this field, and it is all good. Now we would like to create two endpoints for retrieving students and for adding the students. Let's start with retrieving. So in the first place we want to use the get mapping annotation and specify our method. So it will be public. We will be returning response entity, which is the generic type, and from the service we will return the page object, which is the wrapper for our student entity. And we have to import it, of course, and also we have to import the page. And now we can give it a name, and it will be get students. Our get students endpoint will receive the student page object. So we want to say student page over here with the same name. And now all we have to do is to say return, and it will be a new response entity, and we will call inside our student service method, which is the get students, and it accepts the student page. So this is what we want to do. And also as the second argument of the response entity, we'll say HTTP status OK, like this. And this one will in the first place call the student service and get students method and pass the student page data. And after retrieving this data, everything will be wrapped up into the response entity with the status OK. This is good, so let's move to the adding student method, and now we want to use the post mapping annotation, and it will go like this. So we'll say public response entity like before, but this time we'll not use the page wrapper, we'll simply pass the student entity, and the method will be called add student. Of course, it will accept the student object, so we will say student with the same name. We want the student object to be passed in the request body, so we have to mark our parameter with the request body annotation, like this. Everything we have to do in the body of our post method is to say return new response entity, and inside we want to use our student service, and this time we'll call the add student method, and we'll pass the student object which will come from the request body. And the second argument of the response entity will be HTTP status OK. Controller is ready, and now to wrap everything up, we will add the Spring Fox boot starter, so our API will be documented. And to do it, we'll navigate to the pom.xml. Over here, we have to look for the dependency stack. It's over here. And let's say somewhere here we'll add new dependency. So we want to say dependency. And the artifact ID is Spring Fox -boot -starter, and the group ID will be added automatically. And we can see that it is the Spring Fox version 3, and thanks to that everything is auto configured, so we don't have to add any configuration beans or annotations. It is also worth to click this Maven load changes button, so our dependencies will be updated. We are finally ready to start our project, so we want to go to the Maven, we want to open it up, we want to go to the plugins, Spring Boot, and we want to click Spring Boot Run. And after a few seconds, our application should be up on the port 8080, which is the default port, and we'll open our Swagger UI. To open Swagger UI documentation, you want to navigate to the localhost port 8080, which is the port of our application, and the path is swagger-ui/index.html. This is how the Swagger UI looks in the version 3. It's quite nice, but the most important thing is that we can test our API and we can see our student controller over here. So let's click it. And we can see that we have our two endpoints over here, one for retrieving the students and second one for adding the students. So let's click the second one and let's scroll down. And now to test our add student endpoint, we want to click try it out, and we have the text area for the request pod over here. I'm not good at making up names, so we'll add 3 students with the name John Doe and also 3 students with the name Tom Smith. So we will go over here and we'll change the name to John, and the last name will change to Doe. We don't have to pass ID, so we can remove it from here and we can click execute. And over here at the bottom, we can see example request. And we can see that the first name John, last name Doe student has been returned with the ID 1. We'll add 2 more of them, so we click execute again. The ID should be 2, it's okay, and 1 more, and the ID should be 3. That's good. So now let's change it to the Tom, and the last name will be Smith, and we want to add him. And the Tom Smith with the ID 4 is here. 1 more and 1 more, so it should be ID 6, and it is correct. So now we can close it and go to the get students. Over here we can find our student page object and its fields. So we have the page number, page size, sort by, and sort direction. Each of these fields has default values, so we don't have to provide any data right now. And we have 6 entries in the database. Page number is set to 0 by default, so we'll get the first page, and the page size is set to 10, so we should get all 6 entries from the database. To do it, we want to click try it out and we want to click execute. If we scroll down, we can see content array, which has our entries from the database, and also at the bottom we have some metadata. And here we can find information like the page size, which is set to 10, which is correct because it is the default value. Same goes for the page number. Also, we can see the total elements, which is 6, which is also correct, and total pages is 1. Now let's scroll up and we will change the sort by to ID. So it will be the same order as we have added our entries. The page number will change to 0, so this is the default for now. This is the same value, and the page size will set to 3. So we should get first free entry. Let's hit execute. Let's scroll down, and we can see that we have John Doe with the ID 1, 2, and the 3 with the correct order. And if we scroll down, we can see that the page size is 3, page number is 0, total elements is 6, and this time total pages is set to 2. And now if we go up again and we'll change the page number to 1 and hit execute, we can scroll down back here, and we can see that we have the Tom Smith with the ID 4, 5, and the 6. And here we can see that we are right now on the page number 1. Okay guys, so this is how you want to implement paging and sorting using Spring Data in the Java Spring Boot application. I hope it will be useful for you to know how to implement this stuff, because when you are dealing with a lot of data in the database, this is the way to go so you can achieve the best performance. And yeah, thank you for watching. Remember about supporting by subscribing to the channel and liking the videos. See you next time. Bye.